Indeed, indeed. As always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please tell us a bit about your work and your background and your remarkable influence and cultural currency within the ecosystem, Tessa.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about my work and about the broader ecosystem in social finance in Canada. So I am based at Carleton University, and in particular at the research center, the Carleton Centre for Community Innovation. And I have been working in this area for about the last 30 years around basically two major thrusts. One being what's now termed sustainable finance. I can take you through 30 years of different terminology, but it is one and the same, from socially responsible to now sustainable, and the other in social finance. So both of these two areas that I've focused my research and my teaching on, and in a way, as you would know, Victor, my kind of broader activism are based on thinking about capital as a tool that can be used to advance, community, to advance issues like sustainability. So really thinking about that tool and how it can be harnessed.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Your background is phenomenal and your body of work speaks for itself. So when we think about terms like community finance, sustainable finance, impact investing, social finance, and these terms used so interchangeably sometimes, how do you feel about the future of these ecosystems within the context of Canada?
Well, Victor, it's really interesting because when I think back over my work in this field in the 1990s, I, was really advancing responsible investment an approach that should be used. And at the time, it was really niche, really niche. And now, granted, I was 30 years younger, but I still describe the sort of, at major mainstream finance conferences, it was kind of like pat, pat, pat on the head. And there, dear, don't worry your little head about these sorts of things. The market's going to take care of everything that we need it to take care of. And one of the things that's actually quite interesting is that over the course of this time, coming up to now, I have seen responsible investing, sustainable finance, those two terms are interchangeable, and along with the term ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. So those three things really are the underpinnings of that approach to capital. And what they say is that investors are going to take environmental, social, and governance factors, ESG, into account in investment decision making. And I have actually seen that move from niche to mainstream in 30 years. You cannot look at a news feed today without seeing some reference to ESG or sustainable finance. And in fact, the ESG backlash that's going on in the US right now is really a testament to how far that set ideas have advanced in this period of time. And what I'd like to see is I'd like to see impact investing now move from niche to mainstream. And what I mean by that, like, kind of move, is that the principles for responsible investment, that's a UN based body, they have signatories over $100 trillion. Now, you and I know, and these are signatories that say they're going to take ESG into account. But you and I know if $100 trillion was really moving toward positive community impact, we would be seeing a lot more positive change. And so at a certain point, I started to feel that I really wanted not just for these three factors to be taken into account, but also to have that kind of direct impact on communities. And I've really seen that, for example, the UN sustainability goals that many of our large investors are recognizing actually help to move that capital from just considering these issues to seeking positive impact.
Absolutely. And I think that's a remarkable and poignant statement, because so much work needs to be done. And if we want to leave the planet better for our children and our ascendants and descendants, we have to find ways and means to capital in ways that are more equitable and more just. So thank you so much for those actionable insights. In terms of your work currently, are there any barriers or challenges that you face? And what are some of the approaches that you're taking to overcome them?
Well, Victor, I think one of the things that I say as an academic, and I describe myself as an activist academic. So I'm not neutral. I have a position, and I'm advancing that position. And one of the things that I've said is I actually have my task, as I see it, is selling ideas. So I don't actually have to raise capital, right? Which for anybody who has had to raise capital knows is it's quite a slog and usually quite an onerous task. What I'm seeking for is for these set of ideas, these set of positive ideas to be taken on. And, you know, a long time ago, I was asked, what is my personal theory of change? And I thought, well, first of all, I was lecturing about impact measurement, and of course, every lecture or every talk started off with it. You need your theory of change, and some audience member stands up and says, "Oh, well, what's your theory of change?" And I'm standing there going, good question. So I really thought about, like, how do I think change happens? And I feel that positive energy attracts positive energy. And so one of the things that I'm doing as we take these ideas forward is kind of bringing that positive energy behind it, because it's not just, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, it's not just one's own personal network that one wants to activate. You actually want to activate the network of that network, right, and on. And that requires a certain amount of positive energy that's going to flow through. And my own view of like the political environment and the public policy, well, political environment, let's say, is that those individuals are very good at spotting areas of energy. And then they hop on board just like a surfer and ride that wave. And so I'm not taking anything away from other stakeholders when I say that this is about building at the ground level and then bringing others in. But you're already doing that.
Indeed, indeed. But obviously, with the help of so many, and we stand on the shoulders of mighty ancestors and leaders that have been doing this work for decades. In terms of the supply side and demand side of capital, do you have any insights on how we can find ways to harmonize these two groups? Because a lot of times there is a concept that the demand side of capital has to become, for lack of a better term, investment ready. But then a lot of times the supply side of capital, there's a limited onus on them in terms of reform, because they're actually creating the markets and actually creating the infrastructure. So what are your thoughts around how to harmonize the supply and demand side of capital?
Yeah, I mean, that it definitely is the challenge at the core of social finance. And there's a couple of reasons why this is such a challenge. If we want to move from niche to mainstream around social finance and impact investing, then we need to attract those really big sources of capital, like our pension plans and life and health and general property and casualty insurance, and many of these other really big forms of institutional capital. But they are really bound to look for large deals. And what we see at the demand side is basically a need for capital at a much lower amount. So it's like fire hose on one end and straw on the other. And you don't necessarily want to change straw, right? Nor do you have the ability to change fire hose. So the only thing that you can really do is figure out the intermediary that sits between them, and that is going to have the expertise in impact investing and the ability to take that large flow of capital, which in many ways the social finance fund itself is, and distribute it in these much finer streams or finer tranches of capital to the sector. And, one of the things that I would say about that mismatch, for years in my research, Victor, I was always trying to seek the solution, how to solve this problem. But over time, I started to realize that there is a tension, an embedded tension that between scale, which in a way is the fire hose, and community. And often community has many different definitions, but let's just take geographic fixedness. Then you can see it's extremely difficult to scale up geographic fixedness. Or if you're a social enterprise serving a unique population, it may be incredibly difficult for you to suddenly scale up your operation. As I explained to somebody before, if you need to have a caseworker for every 8 employees, your 9th employee is going to cost you a lot, right? You're not going to get back to a good flow till you're at about your 14th employee. And guess what? When you turn over to 17, you're back in the same problem. So, I realized that I didn't want to take away, and this is what you mean about, do we have to turn the demand side into sort of mini businesses? And I don't want to take away from the community centric focus of the demand side by saying, oh, you have to have this ability to scale up so that you can take large investment and solve these problems in a really big way. I think, and so at that point I said, okay, so we just have to live with the tension that sits between these two, right? And most of that living with the tension falls to the intermediaries. They have to figure out a way in which to kind of disaggregate the large flow of capital, not to turn it away, because otherwise you're basically saying impact investment will always be niche, but really to figure out how to meet the real needs of the community, of the community organization, social enterprise that's seeking capital. And now, I always tell my students, I should say this, is never ask a question of the researcher, because we're always way too excited, because I wanted to just tell you quickly about a small piece of research we did where we had, I think it was about 30 social enterprises and 30 not-for-profits. And the two questions in the survey that were most informative were, the first question, what would be your ideal size? Now, the not-for-profits answered just a little bit bigger than we are right now. And the social enterprises, by and large, all answered things like the sky's the limit, right? They would take whatever. And then the next question asked in the same neutral voice is, what would get you there? And the answer from the not-for-profits was more grants and contributions and donations. And the social enterprises, again, by and large, all answered in terms of the market. You know, the market would take us there. And what you could really see is the mindset shift between a kind of traditional not-for-profit and a social enterprise. And you know, I don't define social enterprise by being whether it's a business or a not-for-profit or et cetera. But you know, usually if you self-describe as a social enterprise, you are one, because it's so tough. Why would you describe yourself as that if you weren't? But the mindset shift between those two forms was extremely interesting for me. And it's many of the things I'm saying, Victor, are challenges to you.
Absolutely.
Addressing that mindset shift, intermediaries that sit rather than distort either one or the other, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. You see that all the time. And I think there's some remarkable spaces. When I think about the Catalyst Community Finance Initiative and others in the work that we're doing at Setsi, trying to figure out these pervasive challenges and trying to harmonize these two places. But most importantly, making sure the cost of capital doesn't get more expensive. Because, for instance, the social finance fund, there's the bureaucracy within governments, the flow of capital to wholesalers, and the subsequent flow of capital to intermediaries. By the time it gets to the SPOs or social enterprises, what will the cost of capital be? Will it be
exactly
the same as other financial institutions? So that's interesting and inspiring. So my next question actually is a perfect segue. Are there some key priorities in your work? What's inspiring you right now in your work?
I think, well, two things. I am inspired by the growth of impact investing and social finance in Canada. You know, when I first started teaching in this area about 20 years ago, all my examples of opportunities and things that I saw, most of them were drawn from either the UK or the US. And we didn't have any homegrown opportunities that I could point students to. And, you know, many of my students have gone on to work in this field, FYI. So I've seen a huge shift over that this period of time where our impact investing space has really grown and strengthened, and I believe will continue to do so, even you know, facing these challenges and overcoming them and moving those larger flows of capital into addressing real community need. So that's very inspiring, and I am heartened. I'm not going to say inspired, but I'm heartened by the mainstream taking on sustainable finance. But here, you know, when you step out the door, as so many of us have done in this season, and you can't breathe because of the smoke from the wildfires, it's really hard not to think we have to make these changes faster. And it's not enough to have sustainable finance and ESG rhetoric. We have to see the real change. We're running out of time. So on this, and that's not just the climate, also biodiversity. So those really big capital flows, I want to see action faster.
Absolutely. As my grandmother always said, we need to hurry up and take our time.
Yes, but
Yeah,
we
so
definitely need to hurry up.
indeed, indeed. And we're seeing it, the remarkable work that MP Ryan Turnbull's doing with the next sustainable finance
Yes.
coming up in Ottawa. So that
Mhm.
so I'm excited as well. So my
And
last question. Oh,
Senator
okay.
Ratner's bill as well.
Absolutely.
Very, yeah. These are important allies in recognizing that this change has to happen and has to happen at a faster pace.
Absolutely. The sense of urgency and agency that we've seen from Senator Radin Almodovar for decades has been remarkable, even before she was a senator. So she's one of those leaders that I feel we always have to amplify. So my last question for you is just, do you have any closing thoughts, words of wisdom, or calls to action to our viewers and listeners?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to my theory of change.
Mm.
And basically, the call to action is to bring one's positive energy to seeking solutions, to wicked social problems. And we definitely have many areas in Canada that now need urgent attention, like our affordable housing crisis, like seeking greater inclusion and diversity in our overall systems, and but we don't want to see those problems as an impediment to action. Really, what we want to see is our positive energy be directed at where people feel that they can make the most positive change. And as I say, and I often tell my students that I'll give them a 10-year moratorium and stop referring to them as my former students. But I'm really pleased when I see students going into these areas and bringing new approaches and new ways to deal with these kinds of questions. And I guess I hope that for the vast majority of those who are working in the field.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, especially around the affordable housing. When you look at the work of Isaac Olawale, the Dream Legacy Foundation, Craig Wellington, the Black Opportunities Fund, Elder Emmanuel Meles, who's been working on the national housing strategy when Minister Ahmed Hussein led that portfolio, Cheryl Case at CP Planning. There are so many folks really trying to address these issues because housing should be a universal right. And we can't get it right in Canada. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your leadership, your diligence, and we'll close the way we began this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Tessa, for your remarkable leadership.
My pleasure. Thank you.